Hello, welcome to Issues and Ideas. I'm Chris DeBello. Well, we finally did. This past Wednesday, the total national debt hit the $40 trillion mark. Actually, I heard some analysts say faster than expected. Considering the rate Trump and Republicans are spending, I kind of have to question the awareness level of anyone who was surprised by this. Now, what does this all represent, $40 trillion figure? That's the total debt of the U.S. government, known as the gross debt. It certainly is. This includes all debt owed to others as well as what the government owes itself. Well, you see, there's IOUs to the Social Security Trust Fund, as one example, which the U.S. has been borrowing out of that for years. Now, how big is $40 trillion? That's more than the median value of every single family home in the country. So we're talking about a pretty significant amount of money. They might be thinking, well, it doesn't affect me. It's all politics. That's all stuff over there. Well, it does, because it's all more broad-based situation that certainly limits the government's ability to take care of priorities, at least in theory. But it also affects you because it can make borrowing more expensive. Example, mortgage rates. They tend to rise and fall with the yield on the 10-year treasuries, and the rate on 30-year home loans, that's climbed almost 6.7%, that according to Freddie Mac. Now, of course, we have the blame game with all this. No doubt caught the Trump administration this past week, blaming the Biden administration, blaming even the new Green Deal, which never really actually passed Congress and became law, for the national debt. But don't worry, Donald Trump is creating solutions. I've seen one of those solutions. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he's saying we can grow our way out of this. That's the same Bessent who's launched a federal debt buyback by the U.S. Treasury. Here's the deal. They're buying back government debt, which came about at the 0% rates, but they're buying it back now under the current 4 to 5% rates. Even though this move already fell flat on its ass, Bessent said that they're going to do more of it. Let me put it in a more layperson platform here. That's like getting a new credit card that comes with that introductory 0% interest rate for, usually a year or so. You run up a balance on that card, then you transfer that balance to another card you already have that you're paying 18% interest on. You can see the lack of logic in all this. But getting back to the presidents and the blame game scorecard, let's take a look back at recent presidents and what they added individually to the national debt. Well, not individually, but, with Congress's help, obviously. George W. Bush, he added about $4 trillion. And it's also important to understand why these presidents added to the national debt. Bush, like I said, added $4 trillion. That doubled the debt he inherited. But you also figure out the post-September 11th attacks, the war on terror, tax cuts, and the onset of the financial crisis in 2008. Now we move forward to Barack Obama of 2 terms. He added $9.32 trillion. You want to break that down? First term, $5.81 trillion, and second, $3.51 trillion. That was, of course, the Great Depression, but not Depression, well, some called it that, but the Great Recession of 2008, the drop in tax revenue, and the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. This brings us to Joe Biden, who added a total of $8.45 trillion. Pandemic recovery, also a huge infrastructure investment, and the Jobs Act, as well as, ironically, rising net interest costs. Now we have Donald Trump. His first term, he added $7.8 trillion to the national debt, tax cuts, Jobs Act, COVID-19 checks, you remember those. Then his second term, so far, he's added $4.8 trillion to the national debt. That's what brought us to the current $40 trillion mark that we hit this past Wednesday. And between Trump's 2 terms, easy math to do, $12.6 trillion so far. Now, did you catch the common theme with those presidents and the rise in the debt? Right, tax cuts. You see, tax cuts reduce revenue and add to the debt if spending isn't cut. Seems to be an equation that the men and women down in D.C. are having a challenging time trying to grasp. And if you want to do a verbal pie chart of all of this, as of right now, and no doubt is going to change, Donald Trump is directly responsible for 1/3 of the currently $40 trillion debt when you look at his first and second terms. Again, that's so far. The other 2/3 of the national debt rests with all other of our presidents going all the way back to George Washington. If you come across something on TV you don't like, even troubles you, what are your options? Right, you turn it off, or if you're really bothered by it, maybe you send an email expressing your outrage. According to Disney, that's not good enough for Donald Trump. This past week, Disney filed a lawsuit in D.C. District Court against the Trump administration, who they say is unfairly targeting their TV broadcast shows and properties, which include ABC, and they're doing this via the FCC. The first guest is here to examine the elements of all these actions, along with their implications. He's Telecommunications Policy Analyst with the Competitive Enterprise Institute, DJ Hatch. Thanks for being here today, DJ.
I appreciate it, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
And learn more about this issue, another point of focus of the Competitive Enterprise Institute, CEI.org is their website. So give us the lowdown. How has this been unfolding? A lot of it has been done publicly. I mean, is it fair to say, if you want to get down to the root of this, Jimmy Kimmel is maybe the one to blame for all this happening?
Well, he's certainly a part of the broader scope of this standoff here. I guess it should be added that even before the Jimmy Kimmel issue just this past fall 2025, that in, I believe, spring of 2025, the FCC did try to start opening a equal employment opportunity investigation into Disney and ABC anyway. So this standoff actually was happening even before Jimmy Kimmel.
And that's important to know, too, because, well, I guess that's a big question. Donald Trump publicly, and this is part of the filing that Disney placed before the D.C. Circuit Court, Donald Trump has publicly railed against Jimmy Kimmel, The View, George Stephanopoulos, which legitimately, I guess that one might actually have some merit because, if I remember right, Stephanopoulos in the E. Jean Carroll case said that Trump was convicted of rape or it was sexual assault. The judge qualified that as saying any other place it would have been rape, but that's another discussion for another time. But that's when ABC ponied up $16 million. But all these other issues, is this the FCC using a DEI investigation, according to Chairman Carr's own words, to further attack the programming that Trump has been certainly devoted to?
Well, it's an interesting question, and especially on the DEI related investigation, and that actually was the preceding point before this early license renewal review for Disney. So though I think it's important to recognize that there are essentially two different things running parallel with this same action on the license review. So the FCC says that the license review renewal was tied to that hiring investigation, and then plus this past April they said it was they initiated a broader public interest review, and they said that basically they're denying that it was about speech. And that Disney says that speech is really the cause of the license review here, and that the real target is ABC's content.
And for you listening, you might have been watching, they're called the owned and operated stations. There's 8 total in the major markets, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and the list goes on from there. You might have seen those stations running ads saying, paraphrasing here, the FCC's coming for us. They're saying we're not serving public interest, which that too, DJ, as far as serving the public interest, that basically means public affairs shows, news programming, things like that. Knowing what radio has become, I mean, a token vague effort in radio qualifies as public service programming, quite frankly. Is that the same in television? Because if you look at WABC Channel 7 in New York, all Sunday morning from 6 a.m. until noon is nothing but public affairs programming. So how can there be a claim of coming up short with that?
Well, I think it's important to clarify what the term public interest, I guess, means specifically in the context of the Disney standoff here. So when the government licenses a station, it doesn't just hand over the airwaves. The station takes on an obligation to serve the, quote, public interest. And that phrase comes from the 1934 Communications Act. And Congress also left that public interest language fairly broad, to be honest. So in practice for license holders, this can mean things like covering your local community, running emergency information, sponsorship identification, things like that. Here, though, I'd say the FCC is leaning on a fairly expansive reading of their public interest authority when it comes to reviewing license holders. And I guess a real potentially serious tension here is that a standard that broad when it comes to an expansive reading of the public interest authority may also be broad enough to get stretched towards the content of the news itself.
Yeah, it's a danger having something so vague. You can make it whatever you want to have it be for your personal purposes. In this case, to I don't know if attack is the fair word, but to almost Viktor Orban, as that former leader in Hungary did what he did to media in that country. A lot of people say this is a parallel situation. We're talking with DJ Hatch, Telecommunications Policy Analyst with the Competitive Enterprise Institute, CEI.org, the website, and you are listening to Issues and Ideas. As far as the licensing process, is ABC close to renewal time? I mean, how premature toward license renewal are these actions being taken?
Each station owned by each of the 8 stations owned by ABC was basically on their own separate timeline towards basically their what's viewed as a routine license renewal process. Some were a couple years away, some were more than that. The point is here is that the early license renewal review that the FCC initiated is a fairly unusual step by the FCC here. I think even Chairman Carr said something like, this hasn't been done in 50 to 60 years, the sort of early non-routine license renewal review.
Quotes and content are certainly the foundation we have to go on in exploring things like this. And doing background research, I found several instances where up until traditionally the FCC was at best a quasi-independent department. Some wanted it to be totally, but that's just not going to happen. Where Donald Trump has said numerous times he sees the FCC as an extension of the executive branch. When you look at the past, I'm bringing up a couple of examples here. WBAI-FM in New York back in the 70s aired the George Carlin 7 Words You Can't Say routine. They were fined. They kept the license. They were fined. Far more recent, CBS during the Super Bowl back in the last decade. Of course, the infamous Janet Jackson halftime show incident, heavy fines. There was no license challenges. Don't those two examples, and there's many more, demonstrate just how unusual this move is by the FCC against ABC and Disney?
I think it is fair to say that. Disney also, in their complaint just for this lawsuit, is trying to draw basically specific links between the statements that the president and Chairman Carr have made regarding their own disputes with late night talk show hosts Jimmy Kimmel, The View as well, and ABC's news coverage as part of what Disney views as a retaliation campaign here that's essentially violating their First Amendment rights.
A lot of people, when things like this happen, you can look at various court cases when the Trump administration has gone to court, and they show up really with empty manila folders, nothing to present. And we've gotten into the habit of laughing off these moves or dismissing them, saying, well, it's just going to be another crash and burn in the court. We're used to that, been there, done that. What if this works? What if the administration succeeds in this? What does that mean for what is up until now free and fair mass media?
Yeah, it's a really important thing to consider, because I'd say that the sort of broader power at stake here really isn't limited to this ABC standoff. though these license reviews hit stations just specifically in California, Texas, though also in the Northeast in New York and Philadelphia, the standard or approach being used here by the FCC could, at least theoretically, reach every local broadcaster in the country. So I think a broader question involved in this dispute is whether it's okay to have basically a public interest standard flexible enough that any administration, this one or the next, can lean on a station over coverage it frankly doesn't like.
Certainly something worth watching, because the aftermath could be a lot of changes or a lot of reestablishing of what is right and what is fair. But again, we're a long way from that. But again, on the flip side, when you look at, again, what the Trump administration shows up with in court, maybe this could be a quicker than assumed conclusion. Again, worthy of keeping an eye on. Find out more about this and other points of focus of the Competitive Enterprise Institute. CEI.org is their website. He is their Telecommunications Policy Analyst, DJ Hatch. DJ, thanks for helping us get a better understanding of all sides of this issue, and thanks for being here today.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
If you're listening via your favorite podcast platform, make sure you follow or subscribe. If you've done or you're still doing your back-to-school shopping, you started to think, wow, this is costing a lot more than I thought it would, and a lot more than last year. Well, let me tell you, it's not your imagination. Some of those items in that list the school gave you, they've increased by triple-digit percentages. So who's to blame for this? Is it corporate greed, price gouging, high gas prices that make delivery to the stores more costly? Well, my next guest joins us with the facts about the cause of these higher costs for you, and they're pretty much impossible to avoid or even find an alternative for. He's Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union, Brandon Arnold. Thanks for being here today, Brandon.
Thanks so much for having me.
NTU.org, the website. Learn more about this issue and others that, well, given the name of the organization, certainly applies to you. So the National Taxpayers Union did a study of back-to-school necessities. What were some of the items you looked at, and what were some of the findings that you came up with?
Yeah, we tried to do a pretty good survey of back-to-school items, things that parents are shopping or recently shopped for their students. That includes things like notebooks, rulers, pencils, gym bags, calculators, all those stuff that you're picking up at Walmart or Target or your local retailer these days. And as you noted earlier, the prices are higher. We've seen that across the board, whether it's at the grocery store or the gas pump, prices are higher, and back-to-school items, surprise, surprise, no exception to that rule. You can't pinpoint exactly one reason for the cost, but the reason that we've been focusing on is the tariffs. And we have higher tariffs on most of these products. In some cases, tariffs have increased relative to 2 years ago to the tune of several 100%. So when those tariffs go up, we're seeing businesses having to absorb those costs and in many instances pass those costs on to consumers who are, in this case, back-to-school shoppers who are trying to get their kids off to school this month.
One great example of this, too, in the study, a notebook, the tariffs increased by 98%. Normally, when prices get high and parents have their favorite go-to places for shopping, and if they see prices getting little past the point of tolerance, they would go to a Walmart or a dollar store. Problem with this, though, Brandon, is these tariffs hit the product no matter where it's available.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. You've seen that trend in a lot of retail taking place. Higher-end retailers are struggling. Lower-end retailers are doing better as more affluent people are shopping at those discount retailers. But you're absolutely right. You can't avoid these tariffs entirely. You might have different abilities to absorb them based on how you structure your stores, but consumers can't avoid these tariffs. That's the sad truth of things right now. So everybody's paying a little bit more. Our study, this comprehensive analysis here, showed that in total about $150 to the cost of back-to-school shopping for the average parent here. That may be higher for some, maybe lower for some. But that's a big bite out of folks' wallet at a time when many folks are struggling with other high costs, gasoline, electricity bills, struggling to make ends meet.
This has a ripple effect, too, doesn't it? Because schools have to buy a lot of these same items to a degree, so already strained school budgets just have more weight added to them. And I've seen an increasing number of reports that teachers are paying out of their own pocket to make sure that a lot of these items are available in the classrooms for their students, especially in the earlier grades. So this is not just hitting parents. This is hitting, in effect, every aspect of the learning experience for students with the stuff that they need or the stuff that schools are requiring to have.
That's absolutely true. Schools are taking it on the chin as well. So many teachers, and very few teachers are millionaires and billionaires. So many teachers out there who themselves are struggling to make ends meet. They've brought supplies to the classroom. They're bringing extra materials beyond what the school supplies for them. And yeah, they're feeling the brunt of this just as much, if not more, than the parents are. So that's a big concern right now. The affordability crunch, I think it's going to loom large here as we approach the November elections. It pops up in every poll and every conversation that we have out there when we're talking to taxpayers. People are really concerned with high prices now. It's not just gasoline prices, it's back to school items, it's grocery store, it's across the board. And unfortunately, tariffs are playing a large role there.
So Brandon Arnold, who is Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union, NTU.org, their website, and you're listening to Issues and Ideas. People have raised their voices about tariffs, and the explanation or the attempt to justify them by the Trump administration has been, well, we're doing this to increase domestic production, which is obviously a great idea, but increasing domestic production involves, well, more than just flipping a switch and boom, there it is. We're talking about time here. It's sort of like the Trump administration is closing the door before the new house is built.
Yeah, I think they're kind of missing the mark here. And when you look at the behavior of companies, sure, they're responsive to import costs. And when you raise import costs, that has an impact on them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're just going to pop up a factory the next day. They're looking at the long-term costs and benefits of making those types of investments. And when you're talking about tariffs, particularly tariffs that are imposed unilaterally by the executive, we've seen some of those struck down by courts. We've seen Trump repeatedly change the tariff levels. Sometimes they're higher, sometimes they're lower, sometimes those are grounded in broader agreements. Sometimes Trump just happens to get upset with a particular country and raise those tariffs. So it makes it really hard for the business community to have the certainty that they would need to make enormous investments in the United States economy. If you had more certainty, you may see, and more predictability, you may see additional manufacturing be built up. But until you have that, I think right now a lot of businesses are just saying we have to just deal with these costs, whether that's finding another distributor that might be in a country with a lower tariff rate, or absorbing some of those costs, making sacrifices, or as unfortunately many of them done, raising their prices and pushing those costs onto the consumer.
Which flies in the face of the claim that the exporting countries are the ones who pay the tariffs, where in fact the final point, the end point of the consumer chain, the consumer is the one who's paying it all.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that's what economic theory has told us for decades, if not centuries. And that's exactly what the data that we have now from many years of tariffs under this administration, under the Trump one as well, have reinforced that the domestic companies and therefore consumers as well are paying somewhere to the tune of 98% of these tariffs. So they're not being paid by China. They're not being paid by our international rivals. Only a small percentage of those are being picked up by those companies. Most of them are hitting Americans directly.
How much of this, because we hear the blame game being thrown at the exporting companies, the businesses, but how much of this falls at the feet of Congress? Because, at least my understanding, I'm not a certified constitutional scholar, but my understanding of the Constitution is the creation of tariffs rests with the Congress, the legislative branch, not the executive branch.
Yeah, and it's frustrating because as somebody who believes, I'm sure you do as well, very strongly in the Constitution and maintaining that proper balance of powers. I think the power of tax is pretty clearly laid within Article 1 of Congress. And that's what the Supreme Court ruled when it struck down some of the Trump tariffs. But I think we have eroded some of the authority of Congress, passed that along to Article 2, the executive, certainly in the trade space and other spaces as well. And I do think that creates some serious policy and legal problems here. because Congress needs to absolutely reclaim their trade authority. They need to have control over these processes. There are certain exceptions that need to be in place for national security and what have you. But clearly, when we're talking about the tariffs that have been on the books now for in some instances since 2018, we're no longer really talking about national security. This is just about an economic protectionism plan and an industrial policy, which is completely different.
You're talking about Congress taking control. That's a big ask when we just see this past Wednesday the national debt hit $40 trillion. Control is more of a concept than a practice for Congress these days.
Yeah, Congress does not like to do its work. They like to go out on television and radio programs. They like to, kiss babies and cut ribbons at the opening of new factories and businesses, but they don't like to roll up their sleeves and do something about the national debt, let alone, try to harness their actual powers here and do something about our trade situation, which I think has become a bit of a mess, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've got a feeling the next session might see things differently, but we shall see as the results of the midterms come about. To learn more about this issue, the other points of focus for the National Taxpayers Union, NTU.org, their website, is our Executive Vice President, Brandon Arnold. Brandon, thanks for giving us better understanding and awareness and at least the information we need to help try to make sense of all this. Thanks for being here today.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Over on the Issues and Ideas Facebook page, we have daily conversations and analysis of the current events, the news, entertainment, really no limits, as you'll quickly learn. If you haven't already, you can get to our Facebook page via the link at our website homepage at issuesandideasradio.com. You remember back in July, when Donald Trump came before the nation with the promise he was going to reveal never-before proof that our election system and method of voting, it's in trouble, even rigged. Anyone buy what Trump was selling? We might have an answer, actually. A recent two-tier poll by Brightline Watch looked into all this. They included in their survey, with separate findings, 568 political scientists, who they refer to in the study as experts, and then through the YouGov survey platform, 2,750 Americans. And here's some of what they found. We'll put the link up to the entire survey on our homepage for you to check out. Experts, they're split between describing the U.S. today as having free and fair elections, with only moderate checks on power, 55% said that, versus having unfair, tilted elections and weak checks, 41% agreed with that. Experts also are, let's say, more optimistic about the future. 70% say it's most likely the U.S. will have free and fair elections and either strong or moderate checks on power in 2032. Now, looking at some of the responses by the public, Republicans and Democrats, they're split pretty much equally between free and fair elections with only moderate checks and unfair elections with weak checks. Experts, they're confident that votes will be counted as voters intended in their states as well as nationally. The public is more confident in the vote count, but less so nationally versus in their respective states. Democrats are more confident than Republicans in both cases, but partisan gaps are smaller, actually, than after the 2020 election or before the 2022 and 2024 elections. This is a standout of the survey, too. Experts expect ratings of U.S. democracy to improve to a score of 67 in 2032 if a Republican not endorsed by Trump wins the presidency in 2028, or to a score of 72 if a Democrat wins. However, if a Trump-endorsed Republican wins the presidency, these experts expect ratings of U.S. democracy to drop to a score of 49. But as we certainly have heard, and it's probably going to ramp up the closer we get to the midterms, the claims of rigged elections and voter fraud, mail-in fraud, the list goes on from there. That is no doubt from the White House and the GOP going to continue, which I think makes worthy time to revisit a conversation I recently had. Gentleman's name is Ken Block, and he can speak of whether or not there is voter fraud and the means by which to find it, because after the 2020 election, he was hired by the Donald Trump campaign to do just that, find voter fraud and proof that Donald Trump won the 2020 election. Let's go back to that conversation. Less than 2 weeks ago, Donald Trump went before the American people with the promise that he would present massive new news about supposed flaws in our election and voting process. Now, we can all make claims, but when we do, it's kind of important to back them up in order to be believed. So, did Trump show up with backup? His most loyal followers say he did. My first guest today is here to examine all this through his, well, let's call it very inside experience. See, he was hired after the 2020 election by the Trump campaign to root out voting and election fraud. Shares the details of that work and the experiences related to it in his book, Disproven, My Unbiased Search for Voter Fraud for the Trump Campaign, the data that shows why he lost and how we can improve our elections. He's also currently a candidate running as an independent for Rhode Island Governor. Ken Block, thanks for being here today, Ken.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
And KenBlock.com, the website. Learn more about his campaign if you're listening to us on the podcast in Rhode Island or you want to support his campaign as well. So let's go back to the leading up to Thursday, like I said, just shy of 2 weeks ago now. When you first heard that Donald Trump was going to address the nation about election fraud, what did you think?
Well, I approach all of the different times that the topic comes up as the same way. I'm going to not have a preconceived idea about what it is, and I will take a look at the claims and look at the evidence, and then make a decision. And that's how I went into his press conference from last week.
As opposed to, oh, great, here we go again. But although that's sort of what we got anyway. But I'm jumping ahead here. What was your assessment of what I said? When you put up, you have to show up with backup. So did Trump back up anything that he was claiming?
So no, it was what amounted to a pretty empty series of claims, and the biggest one, and I have the biggest problem with. They're the same thing here, is his claim that China hacked our election data. He claimed that he insinuated that China did so undercover and nefariously, and was going to do nefarious things with the data. Very effective fear-mongering. But when you looked at the data and the documents that the White House put out on their website to help justify and confirm the different claims that President Trump made, when you look at the China claim, while a bunch of the files were redacted almost completely, one of the ones that caught my eye was the fact that China had actually purchased this data. They didn't steal it. And that's really telling us all something, because as a candidate for governor myself, as anyone who's run for office knows, getting a hold of the voter rolls in order to operate your campaign is crucial. You have to know who the voters are so you can communicate with them. So it appears that China went and bought the voter rolls from a bunch of states, just like candidates can do, and sometimes candidates are just given the data. It depends on the state. So the idea that China stole it is wrong. Worse is the insinuation that China can do something nefarious with the data, because if that were the case, we'd never give it to all these different candidates who are running for office, because who would have a bigger motivation to do something wrong than somebody who's desperate to win a seat through an election? So this data on its own doesn't, it's not possible for it to be used in a nefarious way. If it was, we'd already see that. So that claim all by itself tells you an awful lot about what you need to know about the rest of it. He led off with it. It was his big deal. And it really, in my estimation, is not.
Because when you think about that, too, fine, you can get the names, addresses, various elements of data. It depends on the state as far as what information is available. But it's not like you can send out tens and hundreds of millions of people to vote in these people's names. I mean, that's total insanity.
Probably the most nefarious thing that China could do with this data is bury us in junk mail.
or fill up your spam file, which I think that's probably what they did when you think about that, too.
Yeah.
the aftermath, I mean, as I said back in the introduction, his loyalists buy into, I mean, they look at the redaction, the full page is redacted, and that made me think of a George Carlin line from way back when. It's very symbolic, and Carlin used to say, I'll leave symbols to the symbol-minded. But other than that, how much damage politically does Donald Trump do to a political party, the GOP, when he does things like this? Because asking you to put on your politician hat right now, if you're trying to win a campaign season and you have the leader of your party looking backwards, that's not going to help you out too much.
No, and it actually hurts even more when the claims that are being made are increasingly far-fetched. This round of claims really almost reeked of desperation in terms of the wildness of the claims relative to the reality behind them, right? I mean, this was there's a smaller and smaller chunk of the Republican Party that will continue to embrace this narrative, and every time President Trump puts out what amounts to a false narrative, he's chasing people off the narrative, right? It's a little bit like Charlie Brown and Lucy with the football, where every year Lucy says this is the year, and she's going to hold the ball for Charlie Brown. He's going to run up and kick it and send it, into the next county. And every time she yanks the ball away at the last minute, that's kind of, I think, where we're at here with the claims of voter fraud from 2020. It's tiring. It's run its course, and continuing to focus on it I think it has a decreasing political benefit to President Trump, and certainly for Republicans in general. I think it's hurting them.
So Ken Block, disproven my unbiased search for voter fraud for the Trump campaign, the data that shows why he lost and how we can improve our elections, KenBlock.com, the website, and you're listening to Issues and Ideas. I know you haven't been able to study the data, but you've certainly heard the story here. We're based in New Jersey, how in 2023, 2024, it turned out through a mistake by the Motor Vehicle Division, 6,600 non-resident immigrants were registered to vote. 400 of them actually voted in various elections, Democrat, Republican, Independent as well. And Trump and his sycophants are saying, aha, we got them. Do they?
Well, no. The very nature of the problem and the way it was publicly disclosed, and now correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that New Jersey's government came out and disclosed it. It wasn't a story that broke around them. Did they kick off that news cycle by disclosing it, or did somebody else disclose it?
Now, the current governor, Mikey Sherrill, disclosed it, where the former governor, Phil Murphy, should have disclosed it when it happened.
Ah, okay. So look, computer error is not the same thing as fraud. In fact, dirty voter rolls, and some states do voter data perfectly. Many states do it okay, and a couple of states do the maintenance really bad. And when I mean, I'm not even speaking great English today, sorry, do it really badly. There are states that carry tens of thousands of deceased voters on the rolls. And that's not nefarious. They have an administration problem on getting them off the rolls. Having dead people on the rolls is not fraud. It's only if they rise from the dead and vote that you have fraud. And I have personally identified that kind of fraudulent vote. I did so for the Trump campaign immediately after the 2020 election. But when I tell you we found it, we found a handful. We did not find even dozens, let alone hundreds, thousands, or millions. So it's troubling that some states can do the voter rolls so well and others cannot. But that is definitely an administrative problem. And to the New Jersey situation, this wasn't something that was done on purpose. This was an accident. It should have been disclosed by the previous administration, but the fact that it was disclosed is good. And my assumption is it's been fixed already, not an ongoing problem.
Nope, it has indeed, and they did a review, and they're doing in the process. Obviously, there's millions of voters, so they're going to self-cleanse, I guess, the voter roll, we'd say.
Well, so that's perfect. That's how it should work. And that public disclosure by New Jersey lit a little bit of a fire in Rhode Island because we use the same vendor. And so now Rhode Island's going through a little spasm of, we better make sure that this hasn't happened to us as well. So, the idea of publicly owning a mistake, publicly disclosing it, is beneficial in a lot of ways. It helps to build trust, and it helps other states understand that. So if they're using shared vendors, they have to watch out for something bad that had happened. So this is not, to me, evidence of a conspiracy. It's the system working the way it's supposed to. Had New Jersey disclosed it when it happened, but outside of that, they're doing the right thing, and so is Rhode Island right now.
And as you said, too, with states being sloppy in how they handle voter rolls, that leaves the door ajar for the people who are conspiracy-minded or who want to turn politics into conspiracies to do the thing they do. In Disproven, you present ideas of what we do need to, well, not restore or rebuild, but just to better solidify our election process. Is the Save America Act a necessity? Do we have enough elements of that already that we just have to fine-tune it a little bit better?
So, that act is a mixed bag, in my opinion. Some of the things that they propose doing within that bill are really necessary to do. So, just for example, we have the National Voting Rights Act, but a half dozen states or so are exempt from it. Because of just the circumstances when that act was passed in, I believe, the early 1990s. I don't think any state should be exempt from what amounts to federal election law because it really makes for a mess, and we do have a mess there. So one of the things that the Save America Act would do would be to clean that up, and I agree with that. I also live in a very blue state, Rhode Island, and we have had voter ID here for decades. And if not only does it work, efforts to repeal it have repeatedly failed inside our General Assembly, which is, I think, almost 90% Democrat. So I personally believe voter ID works. I think it's reasonable to ask voters to prove they are who they say they are. And, a lot of the problems we had with IDs in the past, as our oldest population has been around since we've really begun modernizing our identifications and things like that. The number of people who don't have, I think, is reducing over time, and I think it's time to really think about it. I actually believe we should have a national voter ID.
Like a Social Security card.
Well, right, and by the way, there's been so many thefts of our Social Security number information over the years. We probably need a new identifier for that as well.
True, very true.
I think we could do a lot of things that could set us up for improving the election system. And let's talk about the big one, in my opinion, right? I mean, this is all kind of nibbling around the edges, but our elections are rigged, and that may be shocking for a lot of people to hear me say it, but they're not rigged for the reasons that have been put out. The reasons they're rigged is we just went through a spasm of gerrymandering across a great number of states in our country. And what gerrymandering is drawing your electoral maps, which is the districts that candidates live in order to get a desired political outcome, right? They're drawing the maps. In Rhode Island, they draw the maps to guarantee that Democrats win elections, and in red states, they draw the maps to ensure that Republicans win those elections in those districts, and that we're no longer electing people on the merits. We're basically have a foregone conclusion as to which party is going to sit in which seats. And that is a terrible thing for us to be doing to our elections, and we have to stop this. And we need people to get vocal about it, and we have to convince partisan politicians to act against their partisan political interest. And we need to bring our elections back to a level playing field, because without it, it's to me, it's meaningless to have elections.
And short of any successful court challenges, it's the fox guarding the chicken coop when it comes to district maps. So it's totally self-serving, denying the people fair elections. And Ken writes about this as well with Disproven, an examination of mail-in ballots, how we see them being attacked and efforts to limit them when, in fact, and talked about this in the conversation last time we were together, that they have actually expanded voter participation. So why would you want to foul around with that? But we have to wrap up here. And again, Ken's book, although written primarily about his works and the interesting, I'll use that word, experiences he had working for the Trump campaign, he also does in his summary present further details about some of the ideas we talked about here about better solidifying our voting and election process. The book is Disproven, My Unbiased Search for Voter Fraud for the Trump Campaign, the data that shows why he lost and how we can improve our elections. Find out more about Ken's campaign for Rhode Island Governor at kenblock.com. Ken, thank you so much for helping us better understand. It's a concern, not the panic, and we have the options of doing things right to better steady and preserve our process of electing people fairly and honestly. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You ever watched the TV documentary series on the History Channel called Quest for the Lost Ark? Had a guy traveling to different locations around the world following the various theories and beliefs about the current location of the Ark of the Covenant. And it's all anticlimactic when you think about it, because if he actually did find the Ark of the Covenant, it would have been a lot more than just a mini-series done about it. But the show is quite educational about the Ark nevertheless. First reference to the Ark of the Covenant, which is also referred to in some Bible translations as the Ark of the Testimony, is found in Exodus chapter 25, verse 10, with God commanding, "And they shall make an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits shall be its length, 1.5 cubits in its width, and 1.5 cubits in its height." Then in Exodus chapter 25, verse 16, God says, "And you shall put into the ark the testimony which I will give you." Along with the 10 Commandments, the ark held a jar of manna. Now, why was this required by God? Because it was manna from heaven, which kept the Israelites alive during their 40-year trek in the wilderness. But manna wasn't simply food. As we read in Exodus chapter 16, verse 4, "Then the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain quota every day, that I may test them, whether they will walk in my law or not." That was God teaching the Jewish people to rely on him for their daily needs. So now you understand the part of the Lord's Prayer when we pray, "Give us this day our daily bread." The Ark of the Covenant also contained the rod of Aaron, who was the brother of Moses. The reason for this inclusion is explained in the 17th chapter of Numbers. God tells Moses to collect a rod from each of the 12 leaders and bring those rods into the tabernacle of witness. Next day it was Aaron's rod that had sprouted buds and fresh almonds. God says this to Moses in Numbers chapter 17, verse 10. "And the Lord said to Moses, Bring Aaron's rod back before the testimony, to be kept as a sign against the rebels, that you may put their complaints away from me, lest they die." The final mention of the physical Ark of the Covenant, that's found in 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verses 17 and 18. "Therefore he brought against them the king of the Chaldeans, who killed their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion on young man or virgin, on the aged or the weak. He gave them all into his hand, and all the articles from the house of God, great and small, the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king and of his leaders, all these he took to Babylon." The centuries-long search for the Ark of the Covenant has been driven by, of course, the desire to see those 2 physical stone tablets which hold the 10 Commandments carved into the tablets by God's finger. Now, it would certainly be a monumental find for the sake of religion, history, archaeology. My question for you today is whether that search should be a priority for Christians. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 8, verses 8 through 13. Because finding fault with them, he says, meaning God, behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, because they did not continue in my covenant, and I disregarded them, says the Lord. For this is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says the Lord. I will put my laws in their mind and write them on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. None of them shall teach his neighbor, and none his brother, saying, Know the Lord. For all shall know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, for I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and their lawless deeds I will remember no more. In that he says, a new covenant. He has made the first obsolete. Now what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away. Doesn't that sound like God revealing that the covenant brought about through the law, 10 Commandments, is being replaced by the covenant that comes through Jesus Christ? Yet those words of God do not say that the law is obsolete. In fact, all through the New Testament, the value and importance of the law is reaffirmed by Jesus Christ, who reveals this in Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 through 20. Do not think that I came to destroy the law of the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law, till all is fulfilled. Whoever therefore breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. The law is designed to give us guidance with how to conduct ourselves as God's children. It's Jesus who blesses us with the path to spiritual cleanliness. Here's how Paul explains this in Galatians chapter 2, verse 21. I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness comes through the law, then Christ died in vain. Law on its own, as we see throughout the Bible, leaves the door open to things like rebellion for way too many who choose to walk through that wide door. It's Jesus who lifts us up and keeps us walking as God wants us to through the narrow door. Here's what we're told in Romans chapter 8, verse 3. For what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh, God did by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh. On account of sin, he condemned sin in the flesh. Now, if you believe that the new covenant puts away the law of the 10 Commandments, then you're taking issue with Jesus. Good luck with that. Who, not only in Matthew, but also in Luke chapter 16, verse 17, says once again, it is easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for one tittle of the law to fail. One more moment focusing on those physical stone tablets, which have the 10 Commandments carved into them by God. If you say that you're a child of God, how can you make your faith require the physical presence of those tablets? How have you opened the Bible you possess and not see the words of 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7? For we walk by faith, not by sight. I want to remind you to check out our website, issuesandideasradio.com. That's where you'll find more information about the guests who joined us here in the show today. We have our audio page, links page. Just on the homepage alone, you can have access to our podcast platforms as well as our Facebook and YouTube pages. So the way to keep it all compact and easy to access, issuesandideasradio.com. Always glad to have you along for the ride. Much appreciated how you spend your time and give us your attention. Look forward to being with you right here this time next week for our next edition of Issues and Ideas.